Good morning, students. Today we are going to read another Curious George book. This is another one that's newer. It was not written by H.A. Rey. Somebody wrote and illustrated it in the style of H.A. Rey. That means they tried to make it look like his work, like the original Curious George books. This one is titled, Curious George Goes to a Costume Party. Do you know what a costume is? That's right. It's an outfit we wear to look like something or somebody else. A lot of the time, we do that near Halloween. Let's read Curious George Goes to a Costume Party, illustrated in the style of H.A. Rey by Martha Weston. This is George. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. A lot of the Curious George books start that way. That's one way they're similar already. Let's look for other ways that this book is similar or different from other Curious George books. One day, George and his friend, the man with the yellow hat, were on their way to a party at Mrs. Gray's house. George could not wait. He liked parties, and he was looking forward to seeing Mrs. Gray. But when the door opened, George did not see Mrs. Gray at all. He saw a witch. "Don't be afraid, George," said the man with the yellow hat. "This witch is our friend." The witch took off her mask. It was Mrs. Gray after all. "Oh dear," she said, "did I forget to tell you that this was a costume party?" George had never been to a costume party before. Inside, he saw more people that he knew. They were all wearing costumes. There was his friend Betsy dressed up like an astronaut. And was that Bill? Why, he looked just like a mummy. George wanted to wear a costume, too. "I have some dress-up clothes upstairs," said Mrs. Gray. "Would you like to use them to make a costume, George?" Mrs. Gray took George to a room with a big trunk filled with clothes. "Borrow anything you like, George," she said. "I have just the thing for your friend downstairs." George tried on lots of costumes. The first was too big. The next was too small. Another was too silly. And this one was too scary. At last, George found a costume that was just right. George was a rodeo cowboy. He wore a vest and pants with fringe. He even had a lasso and a hat. If only he could see himself in the mirror. George was curious. Oh, we've heard that before. George was curious. Could he see himself if he stood on the bed? So he's wondering. Curious means that he wants to know more. He's eager to learn. And he has lots of wonderings. So, could he see himself if he stood on the bed? No, he needed to jump higher. George bounced on the bed just a little, but still he couldn't see. So we have heard in other books that George was curious. We've heard that sentence before. What happens in the other books after we hear that sentence? He starts trying to find something out, and it gets him in trouble sometimes. Let's find out if this book is similar in that way. So he bounced on the bed just a little, but he still couldn't see. He bounced a little more and a little more. Soon, George was having so much fun that he forgot all about looking in the mirror. He bounced as high as he could until... What do you think's going to happen? Crash! George bounced off the bed. He smashed into the night table and got tangled up in the tablecloth. Suddenly, everything went dark. George heard the people downstairs gasp. What was that? Was that a ghost? And George overheard them. A ghost? George did not want to meet up with a ghost alone. He dashed out of the room and down the hall. What do you think dashed means? He dashed out of the room. I think it means he's moving quickly. Look at the illustration. So he wanted to get back to his friend in a hurry, and he knew the fastest way. He hopped onto the stair rail. That's this, the banister, these railings near the steps, near the stairs. He hopped onto the stair rail and he sailed whoosh down the stairs. "It is a ghost!" someone screamed, and everyone turned. They looked scared, and they were looking at George. The ghost must be right behind him. Is it? Why are they looking at him? Is there a ghost? George flew off the rail and landed plop in the arms of a farmer. But this wasn't really a farmer. It was his friend, the man with the yellow hat. Soon, everyone stopped looking scared and started to laugh. "That's not a ghost, that's a cowboy," laughed a policeman. "That's not a cowboy, that's a monkey," giggled a princess. "That's not just any monkey," said Betsy. "It's Curious George." Everyone clapped and cheered. They liked George's Halloween trick. You know, it seems like his curiosity gets him into problems. But then, at the end, everybody seems to like him anyway. Somehow, the problem gets fixed. What was the problem in this book? He fell off the bed and crashed and got tangled in a tablecloth. He made a big noise and everybody was scared. How did the problem get fixed? They realized it wasn't a ghost, it was just George, and they thought that was pretty funny, a good Halloween trick. In the other books, sometimes at the end, everybody's happy with him too. Maybe that's another way this is similar to the other books. "You gave us a good scare, George," said Mrs. Gray, "and I'm glad to see you found some interesting costumes. Now, why don't I take your ghost outfit so that you can join the party?" After the guests bobbed for apples, that's where you try and get an apple out of a big bucket of water using just your teeth, not your hands. I don't play that game because of germs. But that's what that game used to be called. People don't really play it anymore because we know more about germs now. After the guests bobbed for apples, lit jack-o'-lanterns, and played some party games, prizes for the best costumes were handed out. There was one prize for Betsy and one for Bill and 2 for Curious George. "You were the best ghost and the best cowboy, George," said Mrs. Gray. Everyone had a good time at the party, especially George. Too soon, it was time to say goodbye. "Good night, George. Happy Halloween." So we found some ways this book was similar to our other Curious George books. How is this book different from our other Curious George books? Remember, we should be thinking about characters, the setting, any patterns, problems, solutions, beginning, middle, and end. How is this book different than some of the other Curious George books that we've read before?